Imagine burying your 7-year-old son while your own parents vacation in Europe, only to have them return demanding access to his $850,000 trust fund for your sister's wedding. That's exactly what happened to me, and what followed was a legal battle that tore our family apart, but ultimately revealed who truly deserved to be called family. The day everything changed. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 weeks after we laid my son Ethan to rest. I was sitting in his bedroom, surrounded by toy cars and picture books I couldn't bring myself to pack away, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Patricia. "Darling, we're back from our cruise. We need to discuss Ethan's trust fund. Sophia's wedding is going to be quite expensive, and we think it's only fair that the money goes to something joyful instead of just sitting there." I read the message 3 times before the words truly sank in. My parents, who had chosen a Mediterranean cruise over their grandson's funeral, were now asking for his inheritance money. The same money my late husband's father, Theodore Ashworth, had set aside specifically for Ethan's future, his education, his dreams, his life that had been cut tragically short by leukemia. My hands trembling, I called my mother immediately. "Mom, did you really just ask me for Ethan's trust fund money?" Her voice was casual, almost cheerful. "Well, Isabella, the boy's gone now. That money isn't doing anyone any good just sitting in some account. Sophia's wedding is going to cost at least $200,000, and you know how important family is. Ethan would have wanted his aunt to be happy." The audacity stole my breath. Ethan would have wanted his grandparents at his funeral. "Oh, don't be dramatic, dear. We'd already paid for the cruise. Besides, funerals are so depressing, and there was nothing we could do to help the situation." That conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it changed everything. In the days that followed, I began to see the pattern that had been there all along. My parents had always favored my younger sister Sophia, the successful corporate lawyer who'd married into wealth and gave them grandchildren they could brag about at country club dinners. I was the disappointment, the single mother who'd lost her husband in a car accident when Ethan was just 4, the one who chose teaching over a lucrative career, the one whose life didn't fit their social aspirations. When Ethan was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years earlier, their support had been minimal at best. They'd visit occasionally, bringing expensive gifts but leaving early when the reality of his condition became too uncomfortable. They preferred to help by writing checks, always accompanied by subtle suggestions about better doctors or private facilities that I should consider if I really wanted what was best for Ethan. When I'd called to tell them about his passing, my mother's first response had been, "Well, at least his suffering is over." No comfort for my suffering. No acknowledgement of their loss of a grandson. Just clinical detachment wrapped in what they probably thought was wisdom. The cruise they'd booked for the exact week of Ethan's funeral? I'd discovered they'd made those reservations just 2 days after his diagnosis. They'd known he was dying and had planned to be away rather than face it. Accepting that your own parents could be this callous feels like drowning in slow motion. Every memory gets re-examined through a new lens. Was their love always conditional? Had I been so desperate for their approval that I'd ignored the signs? I thought about Ethan asking where Grandma Pat and Grandpa Vincent were during his final weeks. I'd made excuses, telling him they were traveling, that they'd see him soon. He died believing his grandparents would visit, never knowing they'd chosen a vacation over saying goodbye. The grief was multi-layered now, mourning not just my son, but the parents I'd thought I had, the family I'd believed in. It's one thing to lose a child to illness. It's another to discover that the people who should be your support system view that child's death as a financial opportunity. I waited a week before responding to my parents, using that time to consult with Theodore's estate attorney and fully understand the legal structure of Ethan's trust. What I learned both protected me and infuriated me further. The trust was ironclad. Theodore had been specific. The money was for Ethan's benefit alone, with very limited exceptions for education and medical expenses. Upon Ethan's death, the funds were to be distributed to charities focused on childhood cancer research and educational scholarships, causes that reflected the hopes Theodore had held for his grandson. My parents had no legal claim to the money, but that didn't stop them from trying. When I finally called them back, I had Vincent on speakerphone while Patricia listened from their living room in Westchester. "The trust isn't mine to give away," I explained calmly. "It's being distributed according to Theodore's wishes, to charities that help other children." "Charities?" Vincent's voice rose. "Isabella, be practical. Sophia is family. Ethan barely knew those organizations you're talking about. He knew his aunt, he loved her. This is what family does, we help each other." "Family shows up to funerals," I replied. "Family doesn't demand dead children's money for party planning." The conversation deteriorated quickly. Patricia accused me of being vindictive and selfish. Vincent suggested I was punishing them for one mistake. Sophia, when she joined the call, actually had the audacity to say that Ethan would have wanted her to have a beautiful wedding. By the end of that call, they'd made their position clear. If I didn't find a way to redirect at least $200,000 from the trust, they would pursue legal action. They believed that as Ethan's surviving grandparents, they had some claim to his inheritance. Legal action against me, while I was still sleeping in my dead son's bedroom because I couldn't face the emptiness of my own. That night, I sat in Ethan's room and really looked at the space. His drawings still covered one wall, colorful crayon pictures of our family, always including Grandma Pat and Grandpa Vincent, even though they'd visited less and less as his condition worsened. In one drawing, we were all holding hands in front of a big house with a rainbow overhead. He'd written my family in shaky 7-year-old letters across the top. Looking at that picture, I realized that Ethan's real family had been the teachers who sent cards, the neighbors who cooked meals, the medical staff who held him when I couldn't be there, the friends who'd shown up not just for the good times but for the worst time. Family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when showing up is hard. My parents weren't threatening legal action because they loved Ethan or even because they needed the money. They were doing it because they couldn't accept that their financial comfort might be less important than honoring a dead child's memory. The decision wasn't agonizing, it was clarifying. They wanted a legal battle? They'd get one. Theodore's estate attorney, Margaret Chen, referred me to a specialist in trust and estate litigation. Harrison Brooks had handled similar family disputes for over 20 years, and his first words to me were both comforting and realistic. "Mrs. Ashworth, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry your family is putting you through this. The good news is that your father-in-law's trust is very well constructed. The challenging news is that family litigation is emotionally brutal, even when you're legally in the right." Harrison explained the landscape. My parents would likely argue undue influence or claim that the trust's charitable distribution somehow violated public policy by depriving natural heirs of their inheritance. These arguments were weak legally but could drag the process out for years. "They're probably hoping you'll settle to avoid the stress and expense of litigation," he told me. "Many people do, even when they're in the right position. But I wasn't many people. I was a mother who'd watched her child die while his grandparents sipped cocktails on a cruise ship. I was someone who'd learned the hard way that being related to people doesn't make them family." "Let them come," I told Harrison. "Ethan deserves better than this." Filing the initial response to my parents' lawsuit felt surreal. Here I was, 6 months after losing my son, sitting in a conference room with lawyers discussing plaintiff's standing and testamentary intent, when what I really wanted was to be home, maybe finally packing up Ethan's toys. The legal process is designed to be methodical and objective, but there's nothing objective about defending your dead child's wishes against your own parents. Every document filed felt like another layer of betrayal being formalized in legal language. The depositions were particularly brutal. Watching my mother sit across from Harrison and calmly explain why she believed Sophia's wedding was more important than childhood cancer research was like watching a stranger wear my mother's face. When asked why they'd missed Ethan's funeral, Vincent actually said, "The child was already dead. Our being there wouldn't have changed anything." Harrison had warned me about this, how litigation brings out the worst in people, how family members will say things under oath that they'd never say in normal conversation. But hearing your father reduce your son's funeral to an inconvenience that wouldn't have changed anything is a special kind of heartbreak. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly the case would attract attention. A local reporter got wind of the story, grandparents sue over dead child's trust fund, and suddenly our family's tragedy was public entertainment. The media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the public support was overwhelming. Strangers sent cards and flowers. Other bereaved parents reached out to share their own stories of family abandonment during crisis. Teachers from Ethan's school organized a fundraiser for the same charities that would benefit from his trust. On the other hand, every family conversation was now potential newspaper fodder. My parents hired a publicist and began giving interviews about how I was weaponizing grief to deny them their rightful inheritance. Sophia appeared on a local morning show to discuss how the stress of the lawsuit was affecting her wedding planning. The irony was rich. They were publicly complaining about how my grief was inconveniencing them while simultaneously arguing in court that they should inherit money from the child whose death they'd treated as an inconvenience. The case took an unexpected turn when Harrison's team uncovered something interesting during discovery. My parents had taken out a life insurance policy on Ethan when he was diagnosed with leukemia. It wasn't a large policy, $50,000, but the timing was revealing. They'd purchased it just weeks after learning about his diagnosis, around the same time they'd booked their cruise. They'd been planning to profit from his death while simultaneously planning to avoid being present for it. When confronted with this evidence, their attorney tried to frame it as responsible financial planning for funeral expenses. But $50,000 for funeral expenses for a 7-year-old? The jury would see right through that. The insurance policy discovery led to another revelation. They'd been discussing the trust money with Sophia for months, even calculating how much of Ethan's inheritance would cover her wedding expenses. Text messages between my mother and sister included discussions of when the boy dies and how to handle Isabella to access the funds. Reading those messages was like being stabbed repeatedly. They'd been planning to capitalize on my son's death while he was still alive, still fighting, still hoping his grandparents would visit him in the hospital. The trial began on a cold February morning, almost a year after Ethan's death. The courtroom was packed, local media, supporters, and even some of my students who'd come to show solidarity. My parents' attorney, William Foster, opened with an emotional appeal about family and tradition. He painted me as a grieving mother making irrational decisions, controlled by in-laws who'd never accepted my family. He argued that Theodore's trust provisions were unnatural and that any reasonable person would want their child's inheritance to benefit living family members rather than faceless organizations. Harrison's opening was simpler and more devastating. He held up one of Ethan's drawings, the one with our family holding hands under a rainbow. "This is how 7-year-old Ethan Ashworth saw his family," Harrison told the jury. "Notice who's in the picture: his mother, who never left his side during 2 years of treatment. His deceased father, who Ethan still drew because love doesn't end with death. His grandparents, who he continued to love and hope would visit, even though they chose a vacation over his funeral. And his Aunt Sophia, who he adored despite never understanding why she was always too busy to call him back." Harrison continued, "Theodore Ashworth knew his grandson's heart. He knew Ethan would want his legacy to help other children facing what he faced. The plaintiffs want you to believe that family means taking money meant to help sick children and spending it on party planning. But Ethan's family, his real family, knows better." The evidence phase was methodical and damning. We presented the cruise booking receipts, the insurance policy, the text messages planning to spend Ethan's money before he died. Most powerfully, we had testimony from Ethan's medical team about how my parents' absence had affected him during his final weeks. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Ethan's oncologist, testified that children in terminal stages often ask about missing family members. Ethan asked about his grandparents frequently, she told the jury. He would ask Isabella why they couldn't visit, if they were sick too, if they were angry with him. It was clearly a source of distress for him during an already traumatic time. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a grandfather himself, could barely look at my parents as he read the verdict. We find for the defendant on all counts. The trust shall be administered according to its original terms, and the plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. But the jury didn't stop there. In a rare move, they added a statement: "We want to note that the plaintiff's conduct throughout this matter has been particularly egregious. Using the legal system to profit from a child's death while having avoided participating in that child's life and death represents a fundamental misunderstanding of family responsibility and human decency." The immediate reaction was chaos. My mother broke down sobbing, not from grief, but from anger at losing her potential windfall. Vincent stormed out of the courtroom, shouting about ungrateful children and corrupt juries. Sophia, who'd been sitting in the front row in a black designer dress chosen for maximum sympathy impact, followed them out while ranting about having to downsize her wedding. I felt empty. Not triumphant, not relieved, just empty. I'd won, but what had I really won? I'd proven that my parents were exactly as selfish as their behavior suggested. I'd preserved Ethan's legacy, but at the cost of whatever remained of my relationship with my birth family. The broader implications hit me gradually over the following weeks. The $850,000 trust fund was distributed as Theodore had intended: $400,000 to the Children's Cancer Research Foundation, $300,000 to establish the Ethan Ashworth Educational Scholarship Fund for children who'd lost parents, and $150,000 to support families dealing with childhood cancer. Within 6 months, the first Ethan Ashworth Scholarship recipient was selected, a brilliant 15-year-old girl whose father had died in Afghanistan and whose mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat. When I met Sarah at the awards ceremony, she told me she wanted to become a pediatric oncologist like the doctors who helped kids like Ethan. That's when I finally cried, not from sadness, but from pride. Ethan's money was doing exactly what he would have wanted: helping other kids who were facing impossible situations. The media attention had an unexpected positive outcome too. The publicity around the case led to increased donations to childhood cancer research and brought attention to the emotional needs of families dealing with terminal diagnoses. Several hospitals reached out to discuss establishing support programs for families dealing with absent relatives during crisis. Moving forward after winning a lawsuit against your own parents isn't like recovering from other types of legal victories. There's no celebration, no sense of vindication, just the quiet work of rebuilding your life around a new understanding of who your family really is. I started therapy, something I should have done immediately after Ethan's death but had been too focused on survival to consider. Dr. Rebecca Torres helped me understand that grieving the loss of my parents' love, or rather, the loss of my illusions about their love, was separate from but related to grieving Ethan's death. "You're mourning multiple losses," she explained. "Your son, yes, but also your family of origin, your sense of belonging, your assumptions about unconditional love. These are all real losses that deserve acknowledgement and processing." The work was hard but necessary. I learned to see my parents' behavior not as a reflection of my worth, but as a reflection of their limitations. I learned to stop making excuses for people who'd never made excuses for their own harmful behavior. Most importantly, I learned to distinguish between forgiveness and reconciliation. I could forgive my parents for my own peace of mind without allowing them back into my life to cause further harm. My parents made several attempts at reconciliation after the trial, but their efforts revealed they'd learned nothing from the experience. Their apologies were conditional: "We're sorry this got so out of hand, but you have to understand our position." They wanted reconciliation on their terms, me accepting their behavior and moving on without any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I established clear boundaries: no contact until they could acknowledge the full scope of their actions and their impact. This wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. I couldn't allow people who'd treated my son's death as a financial opportunity to have access to my emotional well-being. Sophia's attempts at contact were even more tone-deaf. She sent a wedding invitation 6 months after the trial, apparently hoping I'd attend and act as if nothing had happened. When I declined, she called to accuse me of holding grudges and punishing her for mom and dad's mistakes. I didn't miss your wedding because of a grudge, I told her. I missed it because you participated in trying to steal money from my dead son's trust fund. Some actions have permanent consequences. The most important lesson I learned was about the true meaning of family. Blood relation creates genetic connection, but family is built through consistent care, support, and showing up when showing up matters. My real family turned out to be the constellation of people who'd surrounded Ethan and me during our darkest time. My best friend Maria, who'd slept at the hospital during Ethan's worst nights, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who'd continued bringing dinner every Tuesday for months after the funeral, Ethan's teacher Ms. Rodriguez, who'd created a memory book filled with letters from his classmates. These people had earned the title family through their actions, not their genetics. I also learned about resilience, not the pop psychology version that suggests bouncing back to who you were before, but the real version that's about building something new from the wreckage of what you've lost. I wasn't the same person who'd called my mother that Tuesday morning in March. I was someone who'd learned to protect what mattered and to recognize love by its actions rather than its declarations. 2 years after the trial, I'm in a different place entirely. I've started dating someone, a widower I met in grief counseling who understands that some losses change you permanently and that's okay. I've changed careers, leaving teaching to work for the Children's Cancer Research Foundation, where I help other families navigate the system that Ethan and I learned to navigate together. The Ethan Ashworth Educational Scholarship Fund has helped 12 students so far. Each time I meet a recipient, I see something of my son in their determination to build something meaningful from their struggles. My parents and I have had no contact since the trial. According to mutual acquaintances, they've told people I chose money over family, a characterization so backwards it would be funny if it weren't so sad. They still don't understand that they chose money over family, and I chose family over money. Sophia's wedding happened as planned, though significantly scaled down after her legal bills and the costs of her parents' failed lawsuit. She's reached out twice through intermediaries, but her message remains the same: I should get over it for the sake of family peace. But I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of authenticity. I have peace now, the kind that comes from living aligned with your values rather than other people's expectations. Many people have asked how I found the strength to fight this battle while grieving. The truth is, I didn't find strength, I found purpose. Fighting for Ethan's wishes gave me something concrete to focus on when grief threatened to swallow me whole. Others have asked if I regret the estrangement from my family. I regret that they chose money over relationship, but I don't regret protecting my son's legacy and my own well-being from people who proved they valued neither. The most frequent question is whether I think they'll ever understand what they did wrong. Honestly, I don't think they will. Understanding would require them to confront the full scope of their selfishness, and people who are capable of that level of self-reflection generally don't sue their grieving daughters for dead grandchildren's money in the first place. But that's okay. My healing doesn't depend on their understanding. My peace doesn't require their acknowledgement. My family, my real family, knows the truth, and that's enough. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd win an $850,000 lawsuit against my own parents, I'd have thought they were describing someone else's nightmare. Now I understand it was something else entirely. It was the price of protecting love from greed, of choosing authenticity over approval, of honoring a child's memory over adult convenience. Ethan's trust fund is gone now, transformed into research that might save other children and scholarships that are changing lives. His bedroom has been converted into a home office where I work on cases for families facing their own versions of what we faced. His pictures still cover the walls, but now they're surrounded by thank you letters from scholarship recipients and updates on research breakthroughs funded by his legacy. That's the real victory, not the legal win, but the transformation of our worst loss into something that serves life and hope and the future that Ethan always believed in, even when the adults around him forgot how to believe in anything but money. Some battles are worth fighting, not because you want to fight them, but because the alternative is betraying everything you love. This was one of those battles, and I'm proud I fought it. More importantly, I know Ethan would be proud too. If you're facing your own family legal battle or dealing with betrayal during grief, remember, you are not alone, and you are stronger than you know. Sometimes protecting what matters means disappointing people who never really mattered to begin with. That's not cruelty, that's wisdom.